Hey my friends, welcome back to my channel. So today we are talking books. It's our monthly wrap-up time. So in this video, in case you've never watched one of my book videos before, I talk about the books that I read without spoilers, but I do give a little bit of a preview of what to expect from the book, and then I give my thoughts on it. I don't have any type of fancy rating scale that I give. It's literally just a gut feeling of as soon as I'm done with the book, what would I give it on a scale of 1 to 5 stars. And sometimes that means that I give like a half star because sometimes I'm just too indecisive to give it a full star, you know? And at the end of the video, I'll also tell you what I am trying to accomplish reading-wise in the month of July. If you aren't already following my book account on Instagram, it is at Kate Chapters. I'll put it up on the screen and it'll be linked down below, as well as my GoodReads, where you can see all of the full-length reviews that I type out. Okay. Let's get into it. So I read 20 books in the month of June, and one of them was actually a reread. So I read 19 new books, and then I reread one of my favorites, and we'll talk about that after. So the first book that I read, in case you see me looking down, it's because I have my GoodReads on my phone so I can refer to my rating scale and all that stuff. So the first book that I read was The Last Eligible Billionaire, and this is by Pippa Grant. This one I gave a 4 out of 5, and I rated the spice at a 1.5 out of 5. In this book, we're following Begonia, who just got a divorce from her lukewarm husband, and nobody can understand why she got a divorce. They all think she's crazy. She goes online and she finds this coastal Maine estate that's being rented out for an incredible price, and she checks into it. Well, soon the owner of this incredible estate shows up, and she quickly learns that she's been scammed. Well, when he shows up, he's a grouch, and he decides to try and threaten her legally and convinces her to pretend to be his girlfriend in exchange for not calling the police for her trespassing on his property. Begonia was adorable. I loved her. I love the way that Pippa Grant writes characters. She has this amazing, witty banter style when it comes to them. And she has this, unfiltered and raw and real, verbal internal monologue happening for characters that I just find phenomenal. I just loved it. It was a dual POV book, but I really could have just been in Begonia's life and it would have been great. Also, there's a dog in this book, so I mean, you don't need any other information, right? That's all you needed to hear, and the dog was adorable. He was pulling shenanigans constantly. So if that's not reason enough, then you can't be my friend, okay? The next one was called Faking It with My Best Friend. This was by Kate O'Keefe. This one I gave a 2.5 out of 5, and I gave 0 out of 5 for spice. So this was a completely squeaky clean romance. So this one is about two best friends who live in this small town, and the town is selected to be the filming location for this up and coming Hollywood movie. Well, along with the Hollywood crew, there's this assistant guy that's really handsome, and the main female character starts to date him. Well, her best friend quickly realizes that he is not comfortable with her dating this flashy Hollywood dude. I can't, even in my summary, it's just, to me, it's just not the strongest plot. I don't want a dog on a book whatsoever. I think that it was just not a moment in time that I was meant to read this book. I felt like there wasn't a good connection between the characters, and I felt like a couple of the conversations were awkward. Other than that, it was cute. If you're into a Hallmark, low investment type of book, this may be one you want to pick up. Okay, the next book that I read was called Enemies with Benefits, and it was by Roxy Noir. This one I gave a 4 out of 5 for my rating and a 2 out of 5 for spice. So this one follows Violet, and she basically grows up in a small town, and she spends her time trying to outrun her trailer park trash reputation that she grew up with in the small town. She has a nemesis from school days, and his name was Eli, and they end up working together again, and they're basically trying to prove themselves to one another. And at their new employment that they're working together, there's a bonus on the line, so the competition that they used to experience back in high school is back in full force. This book, okay, it had those great small town charmy vibes, but also the spicy scenes were hot, okay? Steamy, spicy scenes. just so well done. And I don't know how more people aren't talking about this book. I want to say it's actually free on Amazon. It's at least on Amazon for Kindle Unlimited, I think, but I don't know how more people aren't talking about this book, because there was a couple cringe moments, but nothing like out of control, and I just loved the plot, so I didn't want to put it down. Okay, the next book that I read was Reckless by Elsie Silver, and this is part of the Chestnut Springs series of hers. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 for the stars, and I gave it 2.5 out of 5 for spice. Now, I want to say this. These books are like on Instagram incredibly popular, so I would just recommend going out to read them because everybody else likes them so much. Even though I'm only giving it a 3.5 out of 5, there's plenty of people out there that think they're like 5-star books. So I still recommend them. It's just that to me, I've read similar books that I like a little bit more. But this one follows Winter, and she's known as the Ice Queen, whose heart cannot be thawed. And she just found out some troubling things about her husband and decides to divorce him. Well, when she's about to give him divorce papers, she runs into one of her estranged sister's husbands, or maybe he's not her husband yet. Might be her boyfriend. Anyway, an associate of her soon-to-be brother-in-law, I should say. They can't stand each other. They're like oil and water, but she decides to proposition him for a one-night stand so she can just forget who she is for the night. Well, 9 months later, she gets a little souvenir from that one-night stand, if you know what I'm saying. So this one, for me, I generally don't like the whole pregnancy trope thing, but I feel like this one was handled the best out of any of the pregnancy books. I really like how it was done. I liked the way the timeline was. And it started out incredibly strong. And I was like, oh my God, this is so much better than the other ones in the series. And like I said, the other ones are very solid, but they're just not my favorite. Well, towards around like the 60% mark, I just felt like it kind of tapered off for me. It just kind of lost its steam. But overall, like I said, I would recommend reading this. Also, if you're looking for just like a straight up spice fest, this book had a lot of spicy scenes, a lot. So I think that's why a lot of people like them, because there's a lot of people out there that just read books for the spice, which do you, boo-boo. The next book that I read was called The Deal by Elle Kennedy, and this one I gave a 4.5 out of 5, and the spice factor I gave a 2 out of 5. So for this one, it follows Garrett, who is a jock, but he's not a dumb jock like everybody thinks he is. But he is failing one particular class, and he is not the only one failing it. Most of the students in the class are failing it, but there is one girl named Hannah who's in the class, and she is not failing it. So he's trying to convince her to be his tutor, and in exchange for that, he's going to help her hook up with her crush. So this is based in like a college, so if you're not into college romances, this might not be for you. But I will say, even though it was based in a college setting, I did not feel it was juvenile whatsoever. It felt mature, but it also felt naturally mature. It didn't feel like it was forced, and it didn't feel like, no, these people are actually 30 years old. It just felt like, it just was, I feel like it was as good as you can make a college romance be. If you're in your 30s and reading it, this would be the one. For me, there was some heavier moments in this, which I appreciate because I like it when you get a little bit of extra substance in books. But it was balanced out really well with the spicy scene. So if you're like dipping your toe into spicy romance, I would say this one would be a good one to start with because there's spice there, but there's also a lot of substance. Okay, the next book that I read was called When Pigs Fly, and it was by Chrissy Lanier. This one I gave a 4 out of 5. There's no spicy scenes in this one. This one's more of like a women's fiction than it is a romance. So this one follows Summer, who was a foster child and had a very traumatic experience with her parents. And then once she was in her foster situation, that didn't go so great as well. So it's actually like a dual timeline where it's her experiencing her childhood and her time in her foster home. And then it flashes, I think maybe 10 years in the future when she's like an established adult. And she's starting to go through life and really process the things that had happened to her. And so as that's happening, it's flashing back and forth. What I truly loved about this book is the author wrote it in a way where I honestly felt like I could imagine being Summer and like closing my eyes and sinking into a memory. Somehow every single time it flashed back, I got that feeling, and I just loved that. I felt like that was handled really well. There was incredibly heavy topics in this one, but somehow there was just this air of inspiration throughout the book, so I really liked that. I felt like there were some very repetitive points, but overall I just think this was a beautiful book. And there are, like I said, some heavier moments. So I would look up trigger warnings if you're sensitive to certain things. So I just want to make sure you're comfortable when you're reading. The next book that I read was Juniper Hill by Devney Perry. And this one I gave a 4.5 out of 5. And Spice Factor I gave a 2 out of 5. So this one follows Memphis, who has a 2-month-old son, I want to say. Yeah, a son. And she just escaped her life in New York and landed in Montana. She gets a job to be a housekeeper at a resort. Well, I don't want to say resort. In Montana. And her new boss has a brother who she basically forced the brother to rent out his loft to this new housekeeper. First of all, if you haven't read Indigo Ridge by Devney Perry, please go and read that first, because that's the first book in the series and it was so good as well. What I love about this whole series is there's kind of like this underlying like romantic suspense thing that's happening. So I just loved that. And it was kind of like us versus the bad guy type of scenario. I felt like the suspense was just so good in this book. I just kept chasing what was happening because it wasn't as predictable as other books usually are. For me, the only reason why I give a 4.5 out of 5 is because the pacing felt a little bit weird to me, and it's an incredibly slow burn. So it takes a while for the romance side to pick up, but the suspense I feel like carries it throughout the book. Okay, the next book that I read was a thriller, and it's called The Housemaid Secret, and this is by Frida McFadden. She's the writer of The Housemaid. If you haven't read that, you should go read it. This one I gave a 4 out of 5. This follows Millie, who was in The Housemaid, and basically she takes on a job working for a couple in a New York penthouse, and she's hired by the husband, which is, in her line of work, is a little odd because normally it's the wives that are hiring for housekeepers. So she gets hired by the husband, and she's instructed not to speak to the wife because the wife is very ill and needs to rest. Well, as she's coming to their house to do their daily cleaning and cooking, she realizes that it seems like the wife is in trouble. And because of her past from book number 1, she feels like she's the best suited to help the wife in this situation. I didn't want to put this book down at all. I'm also incredibly glad that I didn't read it directly after Housemaid because there are some similarities. Now, I will say this, when it comes to this book, there's a lot of it that's really, really unrealistic, but to me, like, the entertainment factor was there. So I think that it's worth reading just because of the fact that the entertainment is there. I didn't feel like it was super predictable. Some of the stuff that happens, like, I couldn't have even guessed it. So anyways, that's all I'm going to say about that. It's hard for me to really like talk about a thriller because I don't want to even hint at anything when it comes to thrillers. Like romances, we know it's going to be happily ever after. You know what I'm saying? But with a thriller, I don't even want to allude to some of the spoilers that could happen there. Okay, next up I read Royally in Trouble by Megan Quinn. So this is the sequel to Royally Not Ready, and I would recommend reading them in order. Normally with Megan Quinn, you can read her as a standalone, even if it's in a series, but for this one, I would recommend reading the first one and then read the second one. So in this one, I gave a 4.5 out of 5 for my rating and a 3 out of 5 for Spice. So this one follows Lily and Keller from the first book, and they're planning their royal wedding. So Lily is a princess, and Keller was her bodyguard. Well, as they're planning their wedding, they're finding that they're having some communication issues, and Keller is struggling with feeling adequate enough for Lily. Well, as this is happening, there's some people that are trying to sabotage the wedding and sabotage the relationship in general. So Lily and Keller have to figure out a way to work through not only their issues, but work through the safety issues that they're experiencing. So this book, there's a lot of suspense happening, and I felt like the suspense was really, really good. The only thing that kept this from being a 5-star for me is when the reveal of what actually happens. I felt like it was rushed through a little bit. This is almost a 500-page book, but I really could have taken another 50 pages of it just for that. So that just goes to show you that this was a good book. Also, the spicy scenes were chef's kiss, okay? Okay, the next up that I read was Unfortunately Yours by Tessa Bailey, and this one I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I gave it a 2 out of 5 for Spice Factor. This is the second in the series called A Vine Mess. Secretly Yours was the first one. I did not like Secretly Yours. I'm so sorry. Did not like that one. Could barely get through it. However, I read the synopsis on this one and I was like, yeah, this sounds more like something I would like. So basically this one follows Natalie, and she has made a name for herself in the investment industry, by taking big risks, but unfortunately she takes one big risk that ends up not paying off and she gets fired. Well, she's in the process of working with one of her friends to develop their own investment company, but in order to access the capital she needs to start this, she needs her trust fund. But her father has it set up that she cannot access her trust fund until she's 1, employed, and 2, married. She has to have both of those requirements met in order to be able to get access to the trust fund. I felt like this was the perfect combination of hidden feelings without being too frustrating or too angsty. There was just a sprinkle of angst happening there, but it was just the perfect amount. I cannot stand like miscommunication and super frustrating plots. This one to me, I felt like it was a perfect combo of that. August, who's the main guy in this book, perfection. I loved him. He is probably one of my top favorite book boyfriends. In books that I've read from Tessa Bailey, she always really nails chemistry to me, but sometimes misses the connection between people, like that soul deep connection. But I feel like this one, she did it. So if you haven't been a fan of Tessa Bailey, this may be a good one to start with. Okay, next up I read this really cute little holiday novella that I've had in my Kindle since one of those Stuff Your Kindle days. This one's called A Holiday by Gaslight, and it's by Mimi Matthews. This one, like I said, it's a novella. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5, and spice factor, it was squeaky clean. There's no spicy stuff going on. It's a historical Victorian novella. So her dad promises her to this man who's actually in the working class, even though she's like in nobility. But it's because the father has gone spending money that he had no business spending, so he has no choice but to marry her off to somebody who has a lot of money but happens to not be noble. I just felt like it was such a charming escape. I think the whole like beginning part is handled a little bit messily, but overall I just felt like it was a really sweet, charming escape. It has like a little bit of Pride and Prejudice vibes going on. There's a grouchy sunshine situation happening. I just thought it was beautiful. I wish that it was a full book because I could have dealt with it as a full book. Also, even though there's like no spicy scenes on it, the chemistry is like hot fire flames. Okay, you guys? I read another historical fiction right after it. It was called Anna Maria and the Fox. And this was by Liana de la Rosa. And this one I gave another 4.5 out of 5. Spice factor on this one I gave a 1. So this one follows 3 sisters, the Luna sisters, right? Luna sisters? Yeah, the Luna sisters. And it's during the French invasion of Mexico. And because of the French invasion, their parents decided to send them off to England to go stay with their uncle, kind of undercover, so people don't realize that that the 3 sisters are related to the dad, who is a, like a diplomat for the Mexican government. The main sister that's followed in this book, and I think it's going to be a series, Anna Maria, she is already betrothed to somebody else, but once she gets to England, she gets herself in a sticky situation, and she ends up having to go into a marriage of convenience with this other guy, the Fox. I just felt like the chemistry, the love story, I just felt butterflies. It was just so sweet. I loved the historical aspect. I really feel like this was probably like 70% history and like 30% romance. It was a slow burn. I just felt like it was so beautifully written. The detail was exquisite on it. I don't know how more people aren't talking about it, especially with the cover. You guys just saw what the cover looked like. Just a great book. The next that I read was Happy Place by Emily Henry. This one I gave a 4.5 out of 5. Spice factor, I gave a 1 out of 5. So this one follows Harriet and Wynne. They've been together for a very long time. They started out as a forbidden romance because their friends had a pact not to fall in love with one another, but Harriet and Wynne did. But they flash forward to the future, and unfortunately they've gotten to the point where where they have broken up, but they don't want to reveal it to their friends because they know they're going to get a resounding "I told you so." For me, this book was so emotional. It was such a big emotional journey, and it pulled out all of the emotions in me the whole time. I will say that I felt like for the first time, I am the type of person, I love dual timeline books. I would have just liked staying in the present. I didn't feel like the flashbacks were very necessary, and I didn't feel like they were done, especially the first half of the book. They kind of just confused me more than anything. So I would have been fine just with doing the present day. But I will say that I loved the friends group. I felt like they were all incredibly relatable, incredibly genuine, and there's situations that they were all experiencing that were divulged in the book just were things that just felt so real and things that I or my friends have also experienced. The next that I read was Boss Man, Bridegroom by Megan Quinn, and this one I gave a 4.5 out of 5. Spice Factor, I gave a 2 out of 5. So this one follows Charlie and Wrath. Interesting name. She is his new assistant, and they quickly realize that they both need a marriage of convenience. So even though they can't stand each other, they enter into a marriage of convenience. However, as they're entering in this marriage of convenience and playing pretend with everyone else, they realize that they may have real feelings. This book was literally laugh out loud funny. I was cackling at points. Charlie is hilarious. Charlie is the female character in this book. She is hilarious. The shenanigans that she pulls off on this, so funny. I just loved this book, and I feel like nobody has really talked about it. I honestly felt the conflict portion was a little weak, so that's why it's not a full 5-star, but the banter and the wittiness and the charm of Charlie, just so good. And like towards the end, there's this like family situation that happens, and I just like all my emotions got pulled out. Okay, the next book that I read was another Megan Quinn, and this is called See Me After Class. And this was, for me, I love Megan Quinn, so this was hard for me to do, but this was a 3 out of 5 for me. And Spice Factor, I gave it a 2 out of 5. So basically what happens is Greer is the name of the girl. She lands a job at a prestigious private school, and when she gets there, the person that interviewed her and kind of made her feel very uncomfortable and like she didn't belong ends up being the teacher in the very next classroom, and he's determined to make her realize that she's not cut out to be a teacher. The thing that I struggled with, I think, on this book is there's a prologue that I just felt was unnecessary, and then I just felt like a lot of the characters were unnecessary. I know it's because it was probably setting up for the series, but I just got massively confused because a couple of the characters reminded me of one another, so it was just like I got a little bit confused. I really loved the grand gesture moment in this book. I feel like of the Megan Quinn books, this grand gesture was really, really awesome. Okay, next up was my reread that I mentioned, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but the On Honeymooners by Christina Lauren. I was having a really rough week, and I just kind of wanted a comfort read, so I decided the On Honeymooners is something that I recommend to people constantly, but since reading the On Honeymooners, I've probably read 300 books since then. So I said, I've been recommending the On Honeymooners, and like I've read so many other books since then. Is it still as good? I'm here to let you know it's still a 5 out of 5 for me. Laugh out loud. I almost think that I enjoyed it more the second time reading it than I did the first time. It's just so good. So definitely recommend that one. Next, I read Love and Other Flight Delays by Denise Williams. This is actually 3 novellas that are set in an airport. I gave it a 3 out of 5. All of them overall 3 out of 5 because you read them consecutively. And Spice was about a 2 out of 5. So the first novella is a meet cute, the second novella is an enemies to lovers, and then the third is a friends to lovers. The first novella, it was sweet, but I felt like it lacked pizzazz. I don't know, I just never I never synced into it. The plot felt like it was barely there. I felt like I really loved the characters, and I really felt immersed in the whole airport atmosphere, so that's a testament to the writing because I really felt like I was at the airport. The second one, I really loved the characters even more than the first book, and I loved the enemies to lovers. That's always my thing. Also, there's like an academia setting happening, and there's some like misogyny happening in the workplace, and I really liked how the male character stood up to it. It felt not preachy, and it felt very genuine, and I just really enjoyed it. The last one was my least favorite. That was the friends to lovers one. I just never felt like the chemistry and connection, and it felt like they stumbled into their feelings versus like realizing that they had it the entire time, so it just wasn't the strongest to me. Next up, I read Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. This one I gave a 4.25 out of 5, and Spice Factor I gave a 2 out of 5. So this one follows Elsie, who's a theoretical physicist, and she has a love that's really, really deep for her field, and it's so deep that she's suffering through having to be an adjunct, I don't know if I'm saying that word correctly, professor. I didn't know what that meant prior to going into this book, but basically it's a professor position that the pay and benefits are absolute junk, so she has to take on multiple jobs at multiple universities just to be able to stay afloat. But even that is not enough, so she actually has to go out and do gig work where she works for a dating app that allows people to go on and ask for somebody to pretend to be their fiance, their date, whatever have you. So she signed up for this dating app, and she finally gets a call for her dream job at MIT. But when she shows up to the interview, her latest client from the dating app's older brother is there and is part of the hiring board. So for me, I'm gonna get the things that I didn't like out of the way for this book. First is I didn't feel like the enemies to lovers thing was that strong. I felt like I kept being confused as to why they were pretending to be enemies, because it didn't feel like they were actual enemies. The second thing is the steamy scenes in this book, to me personally, were incredibly awkward. I just wish they weren't there. They were so awkward to me. So that was hard to get by. Other than that, this would have been a 5-star book. I honestly even probably would have still given it a 5 stars even without that enemy situation. I loved the plot on this book. I just felt like it was so unique, so refreshing. I just absolutely loved it. It just was handled differently than these similar type of plots get handled in these books, and I loved it. Also, I love that Ali Hazelwood always does some type of a STEM background. I have zero scientific background, which is funny because my father is actually a biologist. But I have no interest in science. But even I walk away with like a love for science after reading Ali Hazelwood's book. So if you are an actual scientist, you would probably love these books. Next up, I read All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. This one for me was a 3 out of 5. Now, this book, I'm just going to tell you, is recommended by everyone. So don't not read it based on my review. But this follows a little girl whose father works for the Museum of Natural History in France. And when the Nazi occupation begins during World War II, their family is entrusted with a jewel from the museum, and they're supposed to protect it. So it's a sought-out jewel, and they escape from Paris and move to a coastal town to live with her reclusive uncle. Is that the word, reclusive? Her recluse of an uncle? Sure. To protect the stone. I get why this book is so highly recommended, but I'll tell you why it just wasn't for me, because then you'll know if it's not for you too. I am a very high dialogue reader. I enjoy dialogue in a book. This book did not have much dialogue. It had a lot of detail. It just had a lot going on. I just felt like it was over detailed. The chapters were short, but somehow too much. I don't know. I don't really know how to sink into my feelings about it. But I just never felt invested, and I should have felt invested, but I just didn't. I don't know. So if you are the type of person who prefers there to be limited dialogue and a lot of detailing, then that would be the book for you. But for me, it was a 3 out of 5. Okay, next up, I have to talk about my favorite read for this month. It was Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for This Word. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that word. I don't know if I get flagged, so I'm just not going to say it. This book, 5 out of 5. This is called a cozy mystery. If you guys don't know about the cozy mystery thing, it's basically like quirky mysteries that they have a suspense factor, but they're never like too heart racing, too gory, too bloody, things like that. Vera Wong is who I want to be when I grow up. This follows Vera Wong, and she owns a tea shop in San Francisco. And when she goes into her tea shop in the morning, she finds a body. Now, she feels like the police are not doing enough to solve the case, so she decides to take matters into her own hands. She picks out her suspects, she lets them know she's onto them, and starts doing her own investigation. If you are one of my Hawaii friends watching this video, this is like the meddling aunties that you just love in Hawaii. That's what this felt like. It's based in San Francisco. So if you're even in San Francisco, I'm sure you have the meddling aunties in your life, and you know exactly what I'm referring to. That was Vera Wong, that lovable meddling auntie. She was hilarious. I loved all of the characters in this book. I loved the plot. I loved the suspense. I just loved everything about this. I'm the type that I try to read really fast because I'm always like chasing my next book. But this one, I did not want to stop reading it. I know for a fact I will read this book again in like 2 or 3 months just so I can spend more time with Vera Wang. I pray to God this has turned into a series because she is the cutest character ever. So I hope I've convinced you to go get this book because I don't feel like a lot of people are talking about it. If you're not into thrillers, if you're normally like the type that just wants like a nice little beach read, this is the one, okay? Just loved it. Okay, so now let's discuss, those are all the books that I read in the month of June. So now let's just quickly go through the books that I plan to read in the month of July. So the first book that I hope to read is How to Lose at Love by Sarah Ney. Then The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. Another book that I have planned for this month is The Fourth Wing. I'll get to that in a second. And apparently people are saying that book, The Serpent and the Wings of Night, is even better than the fourth. That one, I am not normally into fantasy, but people are saying you have to dip into fantasy with these, so whatever. Also, I'm in a Megan Quinn Facebook group, and the book of the month that they're all reading together is Love, Sincerely Yours. This is a dual writer situation with Sarah Ney and Megan Quinn, so I'll be reading that. Fourth Wing, let's talk about this. So Fourth Wing, or The Fourth Wing, is it The Fourth Wing or just Fourth Wing? Just Fourth Wing. This apparently went like viral on TikTok and Instagram, and it completely sold out at like all bookshops. So I ended up ordering it on Amazon. I finally got it in, and I am ready to go. I'm ready to read this. It's supposed to be amazing. It's a fantasy romance that is apparently unput-downable. So we'll see, because I don't really like fantasy, so you guys will know if you should read that or not, if you're like me and you don't like fantasy. Next up, Frida McFadden, the book Never Lie. It was on Kindle Unlimited. Funny Feelings by Tara DeWitt. I read the co-op earlier this year. If you like the movie Sweet Home Alabama and you want that kind of vibe, go read the co-op. It was really good. So I saw this on Kindle Unlimited, and I really loved the co-op so much. That was actually my favorite book for January or February or something. So I really wanted to pick this one up. Also, I'm going to be reading Lucy Score's Pretend You're Mine and Finally Mine. I think that's a series, and I want to say there's a third book too, but I just picked 2 for now. Loreth Ann White, The Maid's Diary. I was hoping to read that in June, but didn't get to it, so I'll be reading that in July, hopefully. Megan Quinn, The Highland Fling. My goal is to try and read like 2 Megan Quinns a month because I want to get through all of her books because I love her so much. Next is N.J. Gray, The Piece That Fits. That's like a rock star romance. So if you're into rock star romance, that may be something you want to pick up. I read a novella by her called To Aspen, and it was adorable. So look that up if you want kind of like a holiday novella. Romantic Comedy by Curtis Sittenfeld. I was supposed to read that last month and I didn't, so I left that on my list. Kiss and Don't Tell by Megan Quinn. So that's actually my 3rd Megan Quinn for this month. The Boston Girl by Anita Diamant. I asked my husband to go to my stack of books that I need to read, which I'll go ahead and put on the screen here so you can see how absolutely ridiculous I am. I went and asked him to go pick a random book for me to read, so he grabbed that one. The German Wife by Kelly Rimmer. That's the one that I'm currently reading. And then last but not least is Haunting Adeline. That's apparently a very dark romance, and I'm terrified because there's pretty crazy trigger warnings in that one. So we're going to see if I can handle it, but my friend told me that I can, so I'm going to trust her, and we're going to see if that works. So anyways, that is everything. That's the full wrap up. If you get through these videos, I am proud of you, okay? I am very proud of you for sitting through that. I hope that one of these book recommendations ends up being your next great read. If you need more like daily recommendations or shorter winded type of recommendations, please check out my book account at Cape Chapters on Instagram. On there, I share reviews as I'm reading them. And then also I dip back into older reviews and share those so that way we can get all of the books read. And I also share little templates. That way, if you're also into sharing book content on Instagram, you can go to my highlight that says templates and you can do monthly wrap-ups. You can do currently readings and things like that. I thank you guys so much for being here. Please subscribe before you leave so you can see more videos like this. And then of course I usually do some hauls. I do some recipes. I sprinkle in a little Disney pixie dust as well. Thank you guys for stopping in. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.